Thank you. It follows the siblings of Violet, Klaus and Sunny? Violet, Klaus, and Sunny. Ha ha ha, I remembered. Hello and welcome to the video. My name is Erin and I'm so glad to have you visiting my channel today. The spooky season is upon us, and for those of us living in the northern hemisphere, the autumn equinox is next week, so I thought now would be the perfect time to do a book recommendations video for the spooky season. So without further ado, let's just dive right into the video. The first book that I would like to recommend is actually part of a longer series, and that is A Series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket. If you're not familiar with A Series of Unfortunate Events, this series follows the Baudelaire children, Violet, Klaus, and Sunny, who are orphaned at the bad beginning. And I haven't read the series in its entirety, but I've read about half of the series, and I really like this series. Although it's not, taking place in a particular time of year, the series, covers many different points within the year and many different locations. The underlying tone of the series is very mysterious, and the antagonist of the story is very scary. And so I feel like this series, especially if you enjoy maybe like middle grade stories, this is definitely a series that I would recommend. And a lot of the scenes within the series are very atmospheric and very drab at times, and so I feel like it is one that's really great to read during the spooky season or in autumn. So, Series of Unfortunate Events is the first book on this recommendations video. If you occasionally hear meows in the background, I am filming just next to our front porch, and we have recently adopted 2 cats into our family, Coraline and Faye, and they are sitting on the screened-in porch just off screen, wondering what I'm doing and meowing at me, trying to get my attention. So hopefully the meows aren't too distracting and they just add to the spooky sense of this video. The next book that I would like to recommend is also part of another series, not as long as A Series of Unfortunate Events, but one that I really enjoy as well, and that is Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children by Ransom Riggs. This is the first book within the series, and I have read this book as well as its sequel, but at the time that I had finished the sequel, the first and the second book were the only 2 that were published at the time, and I have yet to finish the series. So if you're not familiar with this series, this story is really intriguing, and I'll have to cheat and look at the main character's name again because it's been several years since I've read it. And let's see, Jacob. So this story follows Jacob, who is 16 at the beginning of the story, and he ends up learning some history about his grandfather, who he's very close with, and learns that there are some secrets from his past. And this story I would consider a portal fantasy, because Jacob ends up traveling through a portal into this sort of alternate reality. And one of the things that I really like about this series is the author is a collector of vintage photographs. And so throughout the story, there are real vintage photographs that are included, and he worked them into the story to be representative of certain characters or certain things that are going on within the story. And I think it just really adds to the story overall. And the cool thing is that these are real people from the past, and some of them, I believe at the back there might be some notes on the photographs, and um, he acknowledges like whose collection the photograph was from, because he worked with other vintage photograph collectors to compile the ones that he uses in this story. But it's such a cool book, such a cool concept. If I remember correctly, Ransom Riggs, prior to writing this novel, had written screenplays. And so it's very evident in this story, the way that he writes, you can picture the movement and the scenes as if you were watching a film. And I love how he was able to bring his love of film and screenplays and translate it into a novel, because it works so, so well. The characters are very rich within this story, and the development of our main character Jacob is also really interesting to watch. So check out this series, and obviously start with the first book, Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. The next book that I would like to recommend is also part of a series. There seems to be a theme with this video. Not only am I recommending individual books, but series of books. And this one is a little bit of a nod to my younger self, and that is Twilight by Stephanie Meyer. Now, I will fully acknowledge that this series is problematic. I recommend this one because it is a nostalgic read. The writing, in my opinion, is not groundbreaking, but what I do enjoy about this series is how perfectly Stephanie Meyer is able to capture the wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. It is spot on, and I love how she was able to set this fantasy story in such a beautiful part of the United States. And I do feel very nostalgic when I think about the Twilight series, because I was in my 20s when I read it. And there's scenes that you read and you're like, "Oh my goodness, like this is so ridiculous. Like this is not realistic at all." But that's okay. It's a fantasy series. It's a young adult series. And I do often find myself wanting to either read the books or rewatch the film adaptations this time of year. So if you're wanting to read something mildly spooky and a little nostalgic, consider rereading the Twilight series. Or if you happened to be one of the few who did not read it when it was at the height of its popularity, I hear that it's having a renaissance with the younger generations now. So pick up Twilight and read it this spooky season. The next book on this list is actually a collection of stories, and I think we can agree that this is a classic set of stories for the spooky season, and that is the complete fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm. There are so many stories within this collection, and stories that I'm sure many of us are very familiar with. And I just absolutely love this collection. I remember as a kid first being introduced to these stories and being horrified, but also morbidly fascinated by them. And they're ones that have really stuck with me. And I do think that because of the fantasy elements, the monster stories, the fairy tales, this very much shaped my love of the fantasy genre. And there are so many favorites. And if you have read some of the Brothers Grimm tales, then you will know the original text is quite different than the adaptations that we see in movies. some of the details are quite gruesome. So, one that stood out for me as a kid was the story of Cinderella, the part of the story where Cinderella's stepsisters are trying to make their feet fit into the glass slipper from the original tale. One of the sisters cuts off her toes so that her foot will fit in the glass slipper, and the other sister, I believe, cuts off her heel so that she can try to squeeze her foot into the glass slipper. Yeah, so very graphic details such as that. So if you don't like, sort of bloody bits within a story, then maybe be a bit more selective with which Grimm fairy tales you read. But if you want something that is classic and has stood the test of time, the Complete Fairy Tales of the Brothers Grimm is one that I would recommend. The next book on this list is another classic, but possibly one that you've not heard of, and that is Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier. Daphne du Maurier is an author that I first discovered in my early 30s, and I absolutely love her novels. And Jamaica Inn is probably my favorite out of the ones that I've read so far. The story of Jamaica Inn follows a female lead character who goes to find work in this very remote inn in the very isolated moor countryside of England. And she senses that there's something amiss within the inn, and there's something not quite right about the owners. I won't give away too much just because it's a very suspenseful story. There's a lot of mystery to it, and it's one that definitely kept me on the edge of my seat. I can remember when I read it the first time, especially when some of the mystery is revealed towards the latter half of the book, I could not put it down. And so this, I feel like Daphne du Maurier, at least with the novels that I've read, she's really good at writing mystery and suspense within her stories. But I feel like Jamaica Inn is one of the spookier stories of hers that I've read so far. So if you've not read anything by Daphne du Maurier yet, I highly recommend starting out with Jamaica Inn. And the final book for this list is a classic that I have not yet read, but I am very much looking forward to reading this spooky season, and that is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I actually have this very old copy of Frankenstein that my wife Cynthia got for me as a birthday present one year, and I absolutely love this edition. It was printed in the 1940s, I believe, and I just love the smell. It has that old book smell, which I think makes it even cooler. And I also love that the title page includes the full original title, which is Frankenstein or The Modern Prometheus by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. I'm familiar with this story, like I'm sure a lot of people are, because there are many adaptations of this story. And I believe in high school I read some excerpts from Frankenstein, but I've not read the novel from start to finish. And so it's one that I'm very much looking forward to reading. I think this is the perfect time of year to read this particular story, as it is one of the spookiest stories within literary history. And those are all the books that I have for this recommendations video. And I would love to know, what books do you enjoy reading in the spooky months of the year? Please let me know in the comments below, because I know there are so many. And I didn't even really touch upon the horror genre, and that's because I don't read much horror myself. But if you are someone who likes to read horror and you have some favorites that you'd like to recommend, please leave those in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and thank you so much for being here. I'd also like to give a special thank you to my patrons over on Patreon who support my creative work on this channel as well as other spaces across the internet. It's truly thanks to you that I'm able to make these types of videos and support my family through creative means. So thank you so very much. That's all I have for this video. I hope that you all are well. I hope that you are enjoying the spooky months. And until next time, I hope you have a lovely, cozy, and spooky book to curl up with. Bye-bye. My foot is fully asleep.